This is TWIS, This Week in Science interview episode, recorded on Friday, May 6th, 2022, with our guest, Gregory Forth. I'm Dr. Kiki, and today we will fill your head with hobbits.
I've got the kind of mind I can't get enough. I wanna learn everything. I wanna fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I wanna know what's happening. What's happening? What's happening this week in science? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening this week in science?
Good science to you, Kiki.
And a good science to you too, Justin, and everyone out there. Welcome to a special interview episode of This Week in Science. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this episode. We do hope that you will enjoy the show. Today on the show, we are speaking with Dr. Gregory Forth about his new book, which I will introduce in just one moment. But before we really jump into things, I do want to remind everyone that if you have not yet subscribed to This Week in Science as a podcast, you can find us all places podcasts are found. Look for This Week in Science. We're also on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook, where we stream live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific time, and very often now on Fridays at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And you can find us on Twitch and Instagram as TWIS Science. Just go to our website, twis.org, if any of this is confusing or too complicated for you. And while you're there, click on that Patreon link to support the show. All right, let us jump into the show. Our guest today is Dr. Gregory Forth. He received his doctorate at Oxford and was a professor of anthropology at the University of Alberta for more than 3 decades. He's a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada and the author of more than 100 scholarly papers and several academic books. We have him joining us today to discuss his first book for a general audience called Between Ape and Human, an anthropologist on the trail of a hidden hominid. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Forth.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Let's just dive right in. Well, I guess take the first step on this trail that you've been on. Can you tell us, what was it that set you on the trail, and how did you come to study on the island of Flores?
I chose Indonesia, and especially Eastern Indonesia, as my geographical area of specialization when I began doctoral studies way back when. My interest at that time didn't have anything to do with human evolution or hominin evolution. I was still am a social or cultural anthropologist, and I was interested in such things as the indigenous religion of an island called Sumba, which is just to the south of Flores. Anyway, that was in the 1970s. In the 80s, I took up a position in Singapore initially, later in Bangkok, with the British Institute, which is in Southeast Asia, which is one of the overseas institutes of the British Academy. One of the requirements for that position was to start a new piece of research in Southeast Asia. So I stuck fairly close to home, which was Sumba at the time. I decided that I wanted to look at some of the peoples on the island of Flores to the north, ones about which not very much had previously been written. So I chose in particular a people called Nage, who reside right in the central part of Flores Island. And very soon after I began working in Flores, researching in Flores, I started to hear about small-bodied hominoids called abugogo, which some people may be familiar with. They're interesting. They're very naturalistically described. They weren't like forest spirits or unicorns or ghosts and goblins for that matter, naturalistically described. And they're also said already to be extinct. This is the abugogo, which of course is another naturalistic feature, I guess you could say. Anyway, I continued. I was researching a bunch of other things at that time. This was by no means my sole topic, but I maintained an interest in these sorts of figures and found that they were mentioned they were known, shall we say, in other parts of the island, other parts of Flores as well. And indeed, in 2001, 2003, I began researching in an area called Leo, among the Leo people, who are further to the east, the eastern end of Flores. And there I started to hear about similar beings, similar hominoids or hominids, but ones that were said still to be alive, although very rare.
Huh.
So yeah, that was interesting, duly noted in my field notes. Then it was a year later, a year after 2003, in 2004, that news broke about the discovery of Homo floresiensis, a very small-bodied hominin discovered at just one site. Only one site has ever been discovered for Homo floresiensis in the western part of Flores, and I was quite amazed because this. The way the paleoanthropologists reconstructed the species, it was very similar to the descriptions I'd been receiving from local people about abugogo, certainly, but also about the Leo ape men, as I call them, for want of a better term. So I had the idea before that these things sound more than imaginary, or less than imaginary, perhaps I should say. And I was interested in finding out. Well, people say they're seeing these things. What exactly are they seeing? What sorts of explanations can we come up with for these claims? And indeed, I mean, that's what the book is all about. It states the problem, the question, and outlines several possibilities, several hypotheses, if you will, and explores those one by one, and comes up at the end with the controversial conclusion that the best way to explain these things is not as, forest spirits or other supernatural beings or mistaken sightings of monkeys or civets, not as an undiscovered species of ape, not as a lost tribe that the Leo people rarely come into contact with, but indeed the best way to explain them, with the evidence available, and also, on the usual rational way of constructing an argument. The best explanation was that they were seeing something, and indeed, or that some of them were seeing something that indeed corresponded very closely to reconstructions of this fossil hominin called Homo floresiensis. And I mean, that is basically the book, although there's a lot more in it than that. I might just say the book is largely a series of reports, of stories of various sorts, and they take up 4 or 5 chapters in the center of the book. But then, towards the end, I discuss, how it might be possible that something like this has has survived, although that wording perhaps suggests that it's been extinct for a long time, Homo floresiensis. Although, of course, that's something we don't know, especially because
Right.
there's only ever been one location, one site for the remains.
Right.
So yeah, that basically is it. I discuss problems in writing about human evolution, or indeed the evolution of any creature generally, towards the end. And I point out, among other things, that we are kind of stuck in the West, at any rate, with a notion of progress, which kind of a unilinear arrangement of things getting better and better all the time, which sometimes even among dedicated scientists and other academics interferes with our with the sorts of explanations we're willing to entertain, among other things.
Yeah, one of
Yeah.
those expectations that these hobbits sort of countered was the expectation that with that small of a brain, there shouldn't be technology. There shouldn't be, this tool
Yeah.
use in hunting and everything else.
Okay.
And then,
Yeah.
then we just right there, we kind of have to reassess. Okay, well, the size of the brain, obviously, we knew wasn't the whole story, but it seems very much that they have defied what we considered possible.
Indeed, although there are other questions. I mean, the evidence for let me say that something we've come to know relatively recently that we didn't know before is that chimpanzees, and indeed other animals, other non-humans, produce and use tools. But for Floresiensis, one thing I must say straight away is that I'm not committed to the hypothesis that these things descend from the fossil remains of Floresiensis. They could be a kind of a cousin species. But that's all, that's all laid
Because
out
there's no evidence,
in
we only
the book.
have. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, there have been hominins, small-bodied hominins, apparently on Flores, according to the archaeological, paleontological evidence for well, it could be a million years. And that's a long time for something to evolve and to give rise to different branches. So.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the island of Flores and get you've been there, you've been in the field. Can you set the scene of these different areas where Ebu Gogo has possibly used to live, and then where the Leo people have possibly still where they're possibly still seeing an
Right.
extant creature?
Yeah, well, I am convinced they're seeing something. What it is perhaps more complex a question. But we've got that's the shape of it. A long, relatively thin in many places island. It's about the 10th largest of the numerous Indonesian islands. So it's quite big. It's not just some kind of South Pacific desert island, as they say, with just one coconut tree. It is on the whole mountainous, although the highest mountains are towards the eastern end, where the Leo live. Their country is very mountainous, but also towards the western end. Of Flores, where the site containing Floresiensis remains was discovered in 2003, but announced in 2004. What else to say? It is tropical. It's climate wise, ecologically as well. It's pretty various. So on the north coast. On the coast generally, but especially on the north coast, you have very, very dry conditions, very, very hot as well. The north coast, especially the northwestern part of the island, is where you find Komodo dragons. which, by the way, are another 10-foot long lizards, the biggest lizard in the world. That's quite well named as dragons. Yeah, they're found in very, very dry areas, dry coastal areas. They too, by the way, were known to local people before they were discovered. By
Right.
Western scientists, Dutch scientists, early in the 20th century. So yeah, dry on the coast, especially the north coast. The interior areas are much better watered. So you're talking about tropical forest in many places high up in the mountains where you get the most
Most
rainfall.
rain. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how would these mountains and the forests influence the stories and how possibly the interactions of the people on this island? Did do the people interact? Do the stories travel from one end of the island to the other? Or
Very good
yeah.
question. Yeah. Well, there are some of these hominoids. You'll notice I'm using hominin and hominoid and so on. There are distinctions, but we needn't worry about these things. Human-like creatures, in other words. There are stories that we can call myths because they happen, at some time in the distant past. We don't know when. We don't know the names of the characters. That they contain fantastic or supernatural elements. Therefore, anthropologists call them myths. Some of those are quite similar to one another, so there is evidence of them having travelled. On the whole, though, I will say that certainly before they built modern roads, travel on Flores was pretty difficult, and yeah, it's not that easy at present either. It takes a long time to get around, even with the modern Trans Flores highway. But no, I just talking about separation of peoples. Yes, you have a number of distinct ethno-linguistic groups. Several different language families.
Huh.
The Nage in Central Flores and the Leo towards the east speak languages of the same family, but they are different. Like English and Dutch and German sort of thing. Maybe not quite that distinct, but you get the idea.
Enough of an isolated history, even being on the same island.
Oh yes, yeah. No, I mean people adapted to their localities. They did trade with neighbors, but on the whole, people spent their lives within a fairly small compass. Just one example in Nage, which is the area I know best. You can go just 4 or 5 kilometers away and find different names for things, different words, even different words for such basic concepts as to go or to travel. And so on. So I, mind you, I mean, local people are pretty good with languages, and they're often bilingual or even multilingual. But I mean, that will give you some idea of the isolation, which has changed since the colonial era,
Right.
which began back in the 20th century. Didn't last too long, but
Yeah, and you wrote a book previously though about discussing metaphor, and I
Oh
love
yeah.
the title of your book was so fabulous, "A Dog Pissing at the Edge of a Path."
Yeah. Actually, that won the Diagram Prize
Yeah.
for 2019 or 2020, one or the other. The Diagram Prize, which is the most unusual title. Some people don't like winning that because it suggests the rest of the book is inconsequential or only the title is worth reading. But I thought it was a pretty good title. It is a direct translation of one of the metaphors that people in the Nage region specifically use. Yeah.
And do you find, especially with these different languages, the metaphors, they're, obviously, I'm not saying obviously, but metaphors, do they differ as much as the words for things in the
Well,
cultures
yeah,
on
I
the
mean,
same island?
I have some facility in the Leo language because my knowledge of Naga, they are, that closely related. Although, as I've said, there are differences. I haven't paid that much attention to metaphors in Leo, but I know some are the same. And one thing that particularly interested me about these metaphors is how some are, to all intents and purposes, the same as ones you find in English. So, what does that say about the human mind?
Yeah, those
Raises a
profound
lot of
truths.
questions anyway.
So you got these two sort of groups, and they both have identified
Hmm.
this creature as being part of their cultural knowledge. And
Hmm.
are they very similar, or how do they differ in any way between these two interpretations of this
The
creature?
hominoids, how do they differ? Or
Or how
yeah,
no how do they have two different versions of the Ogobogo. I'm gonna say it
uh-huh.
wrong, sorry. And
Abugogo,
one,
yeah.
yeah, and then and
And the Leos,
in the
yeah.
Leos, they have a
Mhm.
slightly different version of this sighting of this creature. What is
Well,
how
yeah, no,
similar
no.
is it? How different?
Um, okay, well, one thing to say, of course, is that according to the Nage, the Obugogo are extinct. So,
That's a big one.
So
they
we
don't
used to
claim
see them,
sightings.
haven't
In
seen them in
other
a
words,
long time.
yeah, yeah, no. So there are no sightings. There's actually an exception of that in the book, but I won't go into it for now. Yeah, well, I mean, we assume that most of what people say about Obugogo is passed on, within families and villages and so on. The Obugogo, if anything, if you can make a difference in the content, or notice a difference in the content of the descriptions, the eight men of Leo are smaller and perhaps less hairy as well. And the descriptions tend to be a bit more various in regard to such things as height. Of course, that would apply especially anyway to sightings, because if people are seeing things, presumably they're seeing different individuals at different times. They're seeing different genders, different ages, and so on. So you find the sort of variations that you would expect to see in any natural species. Huh?
And in the extinct version, is there any indication of how far back they are thinking it was seen, or
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would say several hundreds of years is probably
okay?
not a bad. Yeah, I mean, I have. I mean, in another book, I sort of analyzed this question, and I mean, if you look at what genealogies are available, and Nagi aren't very good genealogists, then it could be as recent as 200 or just over 200 years, but the the point is that those genealogies indeed aren't always accurate. So yeah, it would probably be longer than that.
And then there is a suspension of all doubt in this conversation, in that the most recent from that site that has been dated is like now 40-50,000 years, somewhere in that range.
50 to 60 actually,
50 to 60.
although yeah, it was previously
There,
it was
there, there was
reckoned that,
that
one of the
tantalizing,
specimens, yeah, yeah.
10,000 year for a bit was floating out there, but then that one got
Well, it was
pushed.
12,000, I think, was the most usual date in print, which was extraordinarily recent. Actually,
Yeah,
50, 60,000 years ago is
it's still that's
extraordinarily recent for
Yeah.
for a hominin quite distinct from Homo sapiens. And one thing I was going to say is that the remains of, I think, 13 individuals at Liangbua, the single site, covers tens of thousands of years. So these things were around in that area for quite a long time. But
And then
by
you
the
were
same
mentioning
token, that they were elsewhere, obviously elsewhere on the island
Right.
as well, and we don't know how long
but you were
they
mentioning that
survived.
some of it was there was other evidence, and I don't recall. I guess it's not identified as Homo floresiensis, but there was other evidence suggesting 750, 800,000 year.
That's right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and what is that?
What is that? Well, it's curious because well, let me say first of all that the evidence consists of a few teeth, couple of teeth, and a fragment of a mandible, and all that was very deliberately searched for because that area that was in Central Flores, just to the north of the Nage folk I know. In fact, they claim that as part of their territory. They were looking for that quite deliberately for 10 years. They finally hit pay dirt, as they say,
Yeah,
after
because
a
that
long and
helps
concentrated
solve.
effort. But I just
There
want
was
to
a
say
huge
that
debate going
was
on
there?
because
Yeah.
that older finding of at least some hominin
Yeah.
pieces helped put to bed the debate that this was microcephalus disease or this was
Yeah.
a strange grip. Like there was so many people who were, making arguments in
That
different
it was a
directions about
deformed
what
modern human, or yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think a lot of
more
that has been
specific.
put to rest by now. But I
Yeah,
just want to say about the Central Florinese finds. The reason they went there is because this is an area very rich, indeed, in stegodon fossils. These are prehistoric elephants, basically, like mastodons and mammoths. Well, and it was
but they're very
reckoned.
a small version though, right? That's
Well, there are several species of stegodon. Somewhere,
were
at
they?
least two species, I think it is, of pygmy stegodons. But
Okay.
to get back to the hominin remains, the teeth and the bit of a mandible, it's been shown that it's a very small sample, of course, but it's been shown that this individual or individuals, more than one individual actually, were even smaller than Floresiensis. So if we're talking about, at most a meter or so for Floresiensis, then in this case we're talking about something like 70 centimeters, which in feet and inches is, what is it, just over 2 feet, something like that. 30 inches
That
maybe.
is incredibly
What is that?
fascinating.
Yeah. So that is very, very tiny. And of course, this record going back, as I say, 1,000 years or so, is quite unprecedented elsewhere in the world, and as a consequence, it's made Flores a very special place. I don't know if you remember back in around 2004, when the news broke of Floresiensis, there was a picture created by an Australian paleo artist, which showed one of these Floresiensis is with carrying a large rodent over its shoulder. Does that ring a bell?
I'm not remembering that, but there
Yeah, well,
have been many images, but yes, that
yeah. This is a lot of the paleos didn't like that one, but partly because it was a man, whereas the type specimen
was a woman.
is a female.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I just wanted to say, with regard to the special character of Flores, that it has the world's largest rat, which is a wild creature. It doesn't live in houses. And it's endemic, means it's found only on Flores. And there's a picture of it in the book. And this is
Yeah.
the guy with the thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
A
I
picture
remember
of it
the
in the
spear.
book, and it's like, I mean, with the tail, it's about 3 feet long. This rat, so the nightmare of every cat. Getting back to cats, and yeah, I know this is quite possibly one of the things that the ape men, Floresiensis, other hominins could have preyed on. Although the evidence suggests that they were mostly vegetarians. In fact, there's enough vegetarian food about And there's also the question of how they would hunt something like that, because although it's just a rat, it is a ferocious animal. In fact, I discuss that aspect of the creature in my metaphor book.
I wonder, if Floresiensis, even with its small stature, smallish brain, we
Mm-hmm.
know that many chimpanzee and other primate species, human species, hunt in groups, and so there's a
Yeah.
pack hunting behavior. And so, if it's this ferocious big rat, perhaps they were hunting in groups, and that made it possible.
Yeah, at the same time, it helps to have dogs to kill
Yeah.
these things, which and skilled dogs as well, which
Yeah.
Floresiensis definitely wouldn't have had. I mean, one thing I want to say, and I'm glad you mentioned that, the Floresiensis, just to speak of him or her, has a brain about the size of a chimpanzee's. The brain is small in size, in volume, even in relation to the small body.
Yeah.
There have been arguments advanced that although it was small, it was complex, and so the species could have been capable of complex thought. Which is fair enough, but there hasn't been a lot of evidence. In fact, the question is still open, really, about whether they made tools or stone tools, perhaps more specifically, and indeed whether they could make fire, which is something different from using fire. And
Were
of
there
course,
any?
language is another question that comes into
Yeah.
this. And I might say that the ape man, if you take the evidence of the ape man and Leo is definitive, that then they were culturalists, which is to say they didn't have, not only did they not have clothes and houses and the rest of it, they didn't have any technology or
If
fire. Although such a thing, can be can certainly be overlooked. You have to be a trained
yeah,
archaeologist to recognize it.
yeah, and if the weather's
Stone
good, if
tools.
the weather's nice, then
Uh-huh.
do you really need all that stuff?
Well, it's interesting because Flores, especially up in the mountains, can get quite cool at night, as I know from my own experience. And there is a question there relating to the hairiness of past or even present non-sapiens hominins. Basically, it suggested that, and I'm simplifying necessarily, that once you have fire, once you have clothing and shelters of some sort, then you don't need hair, so it can disappear in an evolutionary sense for other reasons. So these things being described as hairy kind of fits nicely with them being described as apparently not having any technology to speak of. I also want to say I had problems writing the book, and I still have problems writing about the ape men and Floresiensis, um, in describing them as human or humans. You might say another, well, something like ethnocentric, I suppose. But, the original name for Floresiensis, Homo floresiensis, took it out of the Homo. It was a name Sundanthropus. And that was proposed by Peter Brown, an anatomist and physical anthropologist who did a lot of work on the remains.
And is
Um,
that was something about was it the wrist or something? The wrist or the shoulder seemed more
okay, yeah,
ape-like to him.
right. No, wrist, shoulders, feet, and well, the teeth to some extent, but certainly wrists and shoulders and limbs and so on are more comparable to well, some to a chimpanzee, or even a gibbon comes in there somewhere.
Wow.
That's the wrists, I think, or indeed an Australopithecine, which is probably one of our ancestors. It goes back several millions of years in Africa. Similarly small-bodied. by the way, and well, there's a lot more to say about the comparison with Australopithecines or southern apes. Sundanthropus, by the way, Sund is a geological term for a large part of Indonesia. Anthropus actually means man, but it's curiously enough, it's always been used to refer to things that weren't Homo, weren't I think I'm right saying weren't hominin. But yes, a kind of a fine distinction. Anyway, it took that name would have taken Floresiensis right out of the category of Homo. So, to which, if you're talking about hominin, by the way, Australopithecines do belong to that. So it gets a bit complex.
But it is. I mean,
I haven't decided, but I tend to the view that this was something quite far removed from humans, especially anatomically modern humans. And if so, that. I mean, it's a bit of an overgeneralization, but it does suggest that it would have had a better chance of survival. I mean, when you have two populations of the same species competing over the same resources, then you're going to have trouble. Although it's commonly the case that you have very closely related species of things sharing the same territory, maybe not exactly the same territory, but overlapping in their territories. Like in Alberta here, we have two species of bears, two species of deer, and on and on, and they're all in the same genus and so on. So I one reason I like the term ape man, especially the ape part. Is a bipedal and erect standing bipedal walking ape possible or not? You might say, well, of course it's possible. We're bipedal apes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I've met a few.
I think you get my meaning. Something much more like an Australopithecine, which was bipedal as well, but something in certain respects more like a chimpanzee that's walked exclusively on two limbs.
That's a whole interesting side piece there too. When we're talking about evolution, we were talking at some point earlier about thinking of things in a linear progression. Most of those knuckle walking apes learned to do it. They didn't necessarily start that way. We may have had a at least bipedal ancestor that we share in common with them. It's not that mankind had to come off of the knuckles and then walk upright. We may have already had that to some extent. Not like we've got now.
But there's so much that we still really don't. There's so much that we still really don't know, right? We're putting the story all together with these bits and pieces of fossils, which are often incomplete, or we don't have many samples of, and then I think we're also putting it together with these indigenous stories, and trying to play forensics, forensic researcher to tell the story of human evolution, or the story of life on Earth. Is the way that you're approaching telling this story, is it different from, say, the geneticists and the other natural scientists who are maybe looking at this very physical evidence?
Well, I mean, I will say that for most paleontologists, biologists, and so on, the only evidence is the only thing that counts as real evidence is physical evidence, a body or bodies, or the fossilized remains of the thing. The kind of evidence I deal in, most of it tends to be dismissed as mythical. folklore of
But
folklore.
that must have been a really I was blown away when
Okay.
the details, the physical finds were
Yeah.
coming in. But I wasn't sitting there having heard two versions of this story from the people in that
Yeah.
area. I mean, it must have been a pretty quick big light that went on in your head. And you go, wait a second, that's not just a physical find. I've been hearing about this.
Well, that's right.
My
But I mean, it's
research.
that kind of evidence, and it's ethnographic evidence, basically, that natural scientists, most of them, there are exceptions, but most of them wouldn't accept. But at the same time, of course, if you talk about paleontology, the evidence for anything is extraordinarily slim. I do discuss towards the end of my book the state of the fossil record. You know how unlikely it is that anything that's existed becomes fossilized, even just one individual, and then you look at the chances of somebody actually finding that thing, and bearing in mind that most fossil finds are discovered fortuitously, quite by accident. Relatively rare cases do somebody actually think, wow, they construct a theory, there must have been something like this as well, and they go out and look for it, and of course they have to find it. Then best known example in human paleontology is the so-called Java man, Pithecanthropus, which means ape man, by the way, as it was then called. There was a medical doctor actually called Dubois who reckoned that this sort of thing had existed, and that a very good place to find it would be the East Indies, which was convenient because he was a Dutchman and employed in the military medical service, and he went out looking for the thing and found it. So but that's very, very much the exception that proves the rule. So we're looking nothing like a representative or a random sample here when we talk about physical, purely physical evidence. So I'm suggesting
and I think that was
maybe other sorts of evidence should be considered as well.
Yeah, and I think that was sort of my point too about talking about how the most recent version of it is now that maybe 60,000 years old.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that it disappeared 60,000 years ago.
No, of course not.
That's just our snapshot, like you're describing.
Yeah, that's
one
quite
lucky...
right. Yeah. Although, unfortunately, biologists, paleontologists do say, oh, this is when it became extinct. It became extinct. You'll read that over and over again, with respect to any number of ancient species, or what are thought to be ancient species. Something I discuss also in the book is the creatures that were thought to be long extinct, millions of years ago. They died out, but which have shown up in I guess it's all in the 20th century now. One is a coelacanth, which is a large primitive fish. In fact, there are two species of those. One found off the coast of South Africa, and the other was found in Indonesia, as a matter of fact, in a fish market. Of all places. Luckily, the person who found it just happened to be a biologist or oceanographer on holiday, on his
right
honeymoon.
Place, right time.
So you see how much chance comes into this. I mean, it's very possible, if just a few things have been different during the 20th century, that very possible that we wouldn't know anything about Homo floresiensis. So Homo floresiensis has made a big difference in terms of this view of hominin evolution as producing a kind of a bushy tree, meaning that you have a number of species alive at the same time. Although until 20 years ago, nothing so different as Homo sapiens, say, and Homo floresiensis or Sundanthropus, if you want to call them that. But then again, there was a lot of overlap with just talking about overlap in time with between modern humans and Neanderthalensis. Homo erectus also. The ape man of
seems to
Jah.
have really gotten around for a very long time. Yeah.
Well,
Very
that's
long
a
time.
highly successful species.
Yeah.
A couple of million years. That may well be better than we do. But that overlaps with Homo sapiens by at least 100,000 years. And depending on definitions, maybe twice that long. So,
Yeah. I'd
and they
love to know.
didn't wipe one another out.
That's all, and that's
Yeah.
also the fun. When we talked about the end date, it's also when they put a start date on a species. I also always find that very, very fascinating. That
Oh well, a start date, of course, is the earliest. It's not a real start date.
Earliest
It's
one,
the
right.
earliest.
Earliest evidence.
Earliest dated
Yeah.
find. Yeah. So how
Yeah,
long has it been around
wonder.
before that? We don't know.
You mentioned earlier, like, the colonist perspective, the Western colonist perspective coming in and kind of bringing our own view of how things worked into the native people and indigenous cultures. And as we're, finding out more and more, in Aboriginal cultures in Australia, there's knowledge going back,
Mhm.
not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And
So it's deep.
yes, steep. And so if we start looking at, this braided stream, the bushy tree, the Neanderthals who lived at the same time as Homo sapien in Europe, and Homo erectus and other species, how much do you think that we have to learn from about our own human history from just listening to these indigenous folklores? And what are we doing wrong that we aren't hearing more?
Yeah. It's a difficult question because people like the Leo or the Nage, just to speak of them, they believe in the existence of, say, believe, they describe that they accept as real. What we would call spirits, forest spirits, spirits of the dead active in this world, and on and on. You have to be careful in distinguishing different categories. At the same time, they talk about all kinds of animals, of creatures that exist in their territory or used to exist, and they line up very nicely, as a matter of fact, with the views of zoologists and ornithologists and all the
Is there an
all the
example
rest
of
of it.
that? Is there an example of that? Like, do they have there was such strange fauna there? There was a giant pelican or something that was roaming around as well.
A stork, yeah.
Or stork.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's known to local people. That goes back, some time that very probably is extinct. But what can I say? I mean, they have they have special names for most species of birds that are found in their territory. Whether they're useful to them or not, whether they're particularly significant, they should identify these and classify them, and, as I said, give them names. Fortunately, several people on Flores, certainly the Leo, make their own distinction between what we would call spirits and other existent things. So they say that spirits and their high god, if you will, as well, are my mesa, which my mesa means only soul or only spirit. In other words, they don't. Fakimona is the way the Nage put it. They don't. They're bodiless, right? And they also say they're invisible, except perhaps to special individuals on rare rare occasions, this sort of thing is always an exception. But with regard to the ape men, they say no, they're not like that at all. They do have special powers, but then so do a lot of other ordinary animals, like crabs and turtles and sea cows, and well, even monkeys in certain respects. But nevertheless, the ape men are different. Anybody can see one. More than one person can see it at the same time. That they give birth, they die, they have to eat, and all these other things that spirits typically don't are held not to do. So that's very helpful, and it is a distinction that doesn't reflect the influence of Western education or anything like that.
Right.
I can show that by reference to very old missionary dictionaries and
Nice.
and the like.
Yeah.
So another important point in the book.
Yeah, it's I mean, this is all so fascinating, and I don't want to keep you too long. So with the book, what do you hope really, like, in the single concept or the most important thing? What do you hope that people get from your book that they take with them?
Well, a number of things. I'm by no means anti-scientific, as as some people in your country these days seem to be, very, very, very sadly. No, I mean, I consider myself a scientist of sorts, at any rate, and I respect the scientific method. But sometimes, and perhaps even necessarily, science is restricted to a very narrow and conservative view of things. There's a lot of boundary maintenance in science, as there is in other academic disciplines. So I'm just hoping that people will. Well, one thing I'm hoping is, of course, is that people will read the book,
Yeah.
and that when they do that they will find it, say, enjoyable or fun. Those terms are perhaps not serious enough, but that it will get them thinking about various things. If they can think in such a way that they find that they have pretty conclusive evidence that what I'm saying is load of nonsense, that's fine. That's fine. So, but nevertheless, it's the open mind. I hope that it will also help people realize that non-Western peoples in small, simply organized societies, communities, living in places that we tend to think of as the back and beyond, or the ends of the earth, that people English readers will realize that these people know a lot. Even though they don't have all the technology and material trappings that we do, that these people are no fools. That they have to live within their environment, and they have to know about it. So they really are a source. I don't say that their knowledge, their folk zoology, for example, should replace scientific or academic zoology. I'm just saying that there is room for complementarity here.
Right, because in some
Absolutely.
ways it's going to be more accurate and specific to actually living in that environment. Whereas the scientific view is going to be, what do we take away and analyze from this without living in this environment day to day? But the sort of biology knowledge that you learn living generations in a biome without destroying it, is a different knowledge, but it's absolutely biological knowledge as well.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, obviously there are differences between academic biology and what we call folk biology, which all of us have. But one started with the other. In fact, I mean, it's been shown in a very good argument by Scott Atran that modern biological systematics, classification, taxonomy, and ultimately our view of change and evolution and so on, that all this comes out of Aristotle. His natural history, and as I've shown in another book, there is a fair amount of continuity between the biology, the zoology specifically of Flores Islanders, specifically the Nage people. I have to be a bit specific, and modern systematics that they're doing the same sort of thing. I mean, there are differences, but nevertheless, it's not as though people like the Leo or the Nage classify and name animals in any old way. They do it in ways that fundamentally are fundamentally similar to modern systematics as a biological classification. So yeah, all these anthropology, which is my discipline, writ large. I for too long, I think it's focused on the differences between people. I mean, some of the commonalities have been taken for granted, but there's still a lot to say about how remarkably similar we are when it comes to the basics.
Well, that's one of the things I love
our
about
senses, our brains, the way that we interact with the world. They're all just,
And it's absolutely one of the
humanity.
things I love about the field of anthropology, because like you said, early days, there was a lot of attempts to separate people. I've seen it. A lot of attempts to separate people, to categorize them, sometimes in very dismissive, you could even call it racist ways, in ways that looked at different cultures. The thing you have to always remember about even the worst part of the history of anthropology is when the results come in, it actually has quite the opposite knowledge. It turns out aren't all these disparate groups of races in the world. No, we all share a common ancestry that what goes back to Africa. I don't care if it's a book club, a cult, a religion, a nation, a tribe, whatever the culture is, whatever their origin story is, it's probably not correct. And there's probably a mountain of evidence in anthropology that can illuminate it. So all the things that it's like the world's fact checker on history. So no matter what narrative someone has tried to convince people of, anthropology can produce evidence that usually refutes the desires of those narratives, which is the thing I love about it.
Refutes the desires,
it's got a very
for sure.
core truth to it that is very important in this world.
Okay, well, that's very complimentary. Pleased to hear it. Pleased to hear your view on that. I think at the same time that we the general public that doesn't know as much about anthropology as it should, including in the respects you mentioned. So I mean, my life has been spent writing articles for anthropological journals, which generally pretty specific, pretty specialized. They have to be in order to be accepted in those. In those journals. So this is my first general book, first trade book, and I find I'm able to do things well, certainly in a book you're able to say things that you wouldn't be able to say in the space of a short article. So there it is. Yeah. Right.
And
I love that picture. It's the wrong it's the wrong environment, echo tone. Actually, that's right at the western end. This is the territory of the Komodo dragon. As you can see, it's pretty dry. The trees you see arrayed most beautifully are planted. They're coconut trees. But then you see the small islands off to the further to the west, which is Komodo, I suppose, from which the dragon takes his name.
I think you made a good choice and a beautiful scenery for a place to do your research too, and to do your studies. Yeah. Could have done much worse. You could have done desert archaeology, Arctic archaeology. There's all sorts of just terrible choices. This looks
great.
Very nice.
Yeah, I know. Life is tough there, though. As I know, increasingly as I've got older, living can be pretty basic at times in that part of the world.
Well, thank you for telling your stories and sharing. I mean, the book with the stories within it of the island, the people, field work there, adventures, the the mystery itself, trying to follow these trails of language and culture to be able to
Hmm.
tell a story. You know, some people may think it's controversial. Others may just find it a fascinating new perspective on life on our planet.
Well, I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you
Okay.
have
Well,
any
thank you very much.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Any final thoughts before we go?
Not really. It usually happens. I stop these conversations, then half an hour later, I realize that there was something brilliant I should have said.
And it's probably in response to
But
the brilliant question I forgot to ask.
Yeah,
So
oh,
exactly.
what was that? Oh, well, right. Yeah, no, that's because this is always the way. But no, I think we've covered quite a lot and given a sense of the research, the study of the book, and
Yeah.
so thank you very much for your interest.
Thank you so much for joining us, and I do appreciate it. Everyone out there, the book is Between Ape and Human. Dr. Gregory Forth, who has been joining us for this last hour to discuss. And just remember, if you want to see more of this podcast, you can find us on Wednesday nights, 8 p.m. Pacific time on our Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook channels. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. And hey, Justin, do you want to give us if we what? If we what?
wait, if you learned anything from today's show, remember,
It's all in your head. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.